conversation on the future of the downtown and Division Street corridor. Recorded January 17, 2019.
Thank you very much for coming out and participating in your community. For those of you who don't know me, I am Mayor Mike Wiesa, and welcome to our first community conversation in regards to our future master plan for the downtown area and the North Division Street or Division Street corridor. We're here because we want your input, so you'll be happy to know that we won't be doing a lot of the talking. You will. We're hoping for some good ideas and some good input, and this process is going to take us a couple of months. There'll be at least one more of these types of community meetings, plus several during the city council and various committees, trying to get input from all of the stakeholders so we see what that vision is for the community going forward for the next 20 plus years. We've got a good mix of people in here, so I think this is going to be a pretty decent conversation. And without further ado, I'm going to thank you one more time for coming in and participating. Don't walk off with the clickers. They bill us for those. But you will be using those later, so you're all going to want one of those, and I think we'll get an explanation of that shortly. So enjoy and participate. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Good evening. My name is Brian Munson. I'm a principal with Vanderwall & Associates. We're an urban design and planning firm located in Madison. And by way of a little extra backdrop, I'm also a native of Stevens Point. I grew up here, and I'm very excited to see this much attendance to really have a conversation about what direction does downtown take in the future, and how do we help that happen? Because what we're launching into is a discussion of the future for both downtown and Division, framed around how do we move it beyond just the pages of a report, but actually get into strategies for how the city could implement it, because a plan that sits on the shelf doesn't do anybody any good. So we're excited to be here tonight. We're really excited that we've got a great turnout. Just to give kind of a brief overview of what we're going to do tonight, as the mayor mentioned, we have a short presentation, and it's short intentionally because we're not here to talk, we're here to listen. Following up our presentation, which is basically some background information about the many, many studies that have happened in this area. What we're looking to do, as you can see in the baskets on all of your tables, you have clickers. We're going to have some interactive polling that we're going to be able to do just to gauge some basic questions about both area. And then we're going to follow that up with an interactive exercise with the maps you see in front of you. So for everyone who's looking for a seat or standing off to the side, we do encourage you, after we get through our presentation, we'd like to try to pack in. We've got room at all the tables. We've got materials for everybody to take a look at, because the goal of tonight is to hear from you as to how you see the future of these areas and look for opportunities and ideas, because, well, I grew up here. It's been about 20 years, so I really need to brush up on my day-to-day activities of how the downtown and Division Street are functioning. So we appreciate the input tonight. So to kind of give that backup of where we started from, again, with Vanderwall & Associates, we've worked with many communities across the Midwest with similar challenges and opportunities, but all of our focus is on not just planning, but how do we make things happen. So building off of the experiences of other communities, coupled with the input of the community to build support and momentum towards implementation, because this isn't a situation where we just add water and change happens. We have to work collectively and collaboratively over the course of many years sometimes to recognize the opportunities, because it's not simple. If it was simple, it would have been done already, quite honestly. If the market was going to do it by itself, they probably already would be. So what we're looking for are opportunities to work collaboratively with the entire community, with stakeholders, with residents, with retailers and employers, to really look at how these areas serve the function of the community, how they can enhance the quality of life for everyone who interacts with the downtown and Division Street corridor, and what this looks like not tomorrow, but 10 years and 20 years from now. So it's a long process, but this is the first step. And we always want to start with a very good understanding of how these are used by all of you, because you bring different perspectives, you bring different uses, and ideas to the table, and we really welcome that, and thank you again for such a great turnout. Sometimes we go to these, the worst thing you do is have a community event and have nobody show up. So to have standing room only is a testament to how important these areas are to the communities. So as I mentioned from a process standpoint, we are really at stage one, which is stepping back, analyzing what plans have been talked about, how have these areas been used, and gathering input. Again, that listening component is critical to build support for any steps into the future. And so we're really at the front end of a four-step process. So coming out of this meeting, we will look to synthesize the information gathered, go back and look at the plans that were adopted again, and begin to look for opportunities within these areas at a kind of a 800-foot level and distill our way down. So really start at the broad brush of the community, step down into the planning areas, and then step further into individual sites and start to think about what could be. We will then be working with the steering committee, with the various committees of the city, and with the citizen groups to get that information back out. So we'll have a draft available for everybody to take a look at, give us feedback, and find out how we're doing. Are we hitting the mark right? Are there things we need to focus back in on? All those things are part of that kind of third step of presenting the vision, presenting the draft information, and then going back and making revisions. The final piece will be moving through an approval process with the committees of the city. So the Redevelopment Authority is the lead committee with the city that's going to be guiding this process, but it'll go through a public plan adoption process so that we can begin then to look towards how do we move it into actions. How do we couple the ideas in the plan with either grant funding, support from different groups, or different initiatives to help it move beyond the paper and actually get construction rolling? Some of the context. So the boards at the back of the room are the slides that we're going to show up here. We're going to have this presentation available. Of course, we're broadcasting it for folks who couldn't be here, but we'll have all this information available on the city's website, so if you want to go back and look at it, we'll be gathering this information, summarizing it, and that'll be available. So again, we want this to be a very transparent process, and we want everyone to have access to all the information. But some of the backdrop for this area, kind of again, stepping down from the city, you can see highlighted in red the two areas. So we're looking at downtown, which spans the west side of the river of downtown, across all the way through downtown out to Division Street. And then the Division Street planning area kind of pivots and heads north all the way past Century. So we're looking at those two areas. We recognize they serve very different functions within the community, and that they will have very different recommendations, that what might work in support of the campus wouldn't necessarily work in support of downtown, and in reverse. So what is happening is almost two parallel planning initiatives looking at two different areas, but it's under the context of input and review from the entire community. So we wanted to run those conversations at the same time. Stepping a little closer, you can see the boundaries and how they interact, and they span very different functions from the old highway corridor of Division, formerly 51, down to the historic downtown core and the environs that used to be part of the mall. There's been a lot of plans. There's been a lot of plans done that look at housing, that look at the downtown, that look at transportation, that look at parking, that look at TIF, that look at a whole broad range of different components. What we want to try to do is synthesize some of that information and reanalyze it, because obviously things have changed. Of course, as everyone saw in the news, change happened yesterday that impacts the downtown significantly. And it's both an opportunity and a challenge, because none of these areas are ever going to stand still. They're always going to continue to evolve, and the city planning has to kind of keep pace with that. So while these form good backdrop, they are information that we are then using to synthesize and project into the vision. So what I'd like to do briefly, also with me tonight, I have Dan Johns, an associate with Van de Walle Associates. Scott Harrington is helping get folks in the room. He is a principal with the firm as well over here. Linnell with Stantec is going to talk a little bit about some of the brownfields components of this. And then, of course, we have representatives of the city staff, Michael and others here to help round out the conversation. But as I said, we're going to quickly spin through a little bit of backdrop and then get to the important part of the evening, which is gathering input from you. So I'd like to turn it over to Dan to run through some of the background, and then I'll come back and summarize some of the map components.
So as part of our front-end process here, we decided to take a closer look at some of the past trends and current demographic and market information just to establish a baseline as we start thinking more about vision and a vision of the future of the community. So this first graph is just a description of the city's share of population with respect to Portage County, and over time the city has added maybe 3,000 people since 1980, but this has been a relatively static share of the county total, so somewhere between 40 and 38%. So while 3,000 people in the context of 23,000 doesn't seem like a lot with respect to other areas of the county that may have 3,000 people, 5,000 people, it's not maybe as noticeable, but in general, the city has been keeping pace with growth in the county writ large. There's been a few spikes during that same time period in population. Interestingly enough, the city saw a pretty good percentage change going into and out of the recession, which is obviously very uncommon compared to the rest of the county and the rest of the state, the blue line here being the city. The city is much younger than the county, state, and even the nation as a whole. That certainly makes sense given the large student population here. Incomes generally lag behind as well, but that's probably owing to a lower median age here. That's 50% of the population is below 27 years old, and that's a huge and growing set of this population that we'll need to start planning for in the future. The same thing, there's a small and growing minority population in the city, about 10% right now, that in concert with a younger, diverse population are considerations that the city will need to respect as the downtown continues to grow, and certainly in the Division area close to campus. Speaking of the campus, enrollment is down over the past couple of years fairly significantly. The college is doing its best to optimize its offerings and to remain competitive on the landscape for its students, and certainly the city needs to be responsive in providing a welcoming atmosphere to the students that are still considering Point. It's always been a natural sciences oriented campus, and as that continues to be figured out, the city will need to be responsive to that. Housing. Naturally, things have oscillated here over time, but over the past 25 years or so, there was somewhere between 40 and 60 housing units built, with spikes in multifamily owing to large buildings being installed here and there. That went off a cliff during the recession and really has been muddling along at nearly none, but as we've seen, there's 4 new developments that have been recently approved between the downtown area and campus. So as there seems to be a pent-up demand for new multifamily housing units in the community. And the same thing is true here. This is a comparison between Point and Plover. That again, the multifamily construction numbers have been muddling along really since the depths of the recession back in 2010, and we are expecting, of course, that number to jump up here in the near future. With respect to the larger economy within the city and the region, this is not a bedroom community. That the jobs to residents ratio is nearly 1-to-1. We are seeing a decline in the paper industry and general manufacturing more broadly. That's really a statewide trend. That's not just unique to Point. But the community is strong in other services, finance, insurance, real estate, and certainly education that are a little bit more resilient when it comes to economic downturns. So Point has perhaps not borne the brunt of that and has certainly recovered a little bit quicker perhaps than others. This is just a quick breakdown of where those largest sectors are. Again, it's a lot of finance, insurance with Century in town, retail, public administration being the county seat, education certainly, and on down the line. That again, manufacturing is not the backbone of this community or really other parts of this region as perhaps it once was. This is just a quick glimpse of where there are concentrations of employment throughout the community in these 5 areas. Between the downtown and the Division Street corridor, we're talking almost, that's 38% of the total jobs in this community. About 25,000 jobs, about 25,000 residents. There are other clusters we see along the rail corridor, just to the south of downtown, certainly out the 10 East corridor, and then some of the more highway-oriented retail where there aren't as many jobs as you might expect. So the areas that we're talking about tonight really are still the core of your employment base and really the backbone of this community. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian to lead us through some of the assets, issues, and opportunities for each area.
Thank you. Well, as I said, we'll try to keep this pretty quick. Just kind of focusing in on downtown first. You see a lot of the transportation plans looking at the complex issues of downtown. Now, the big takeaway from some of those plans are the downtown transportation is overbuilt given the capacity needs. Of course, 10 used to go downtown. We used to have the trucks that came through downtown. We don't have quite as many. We don't have quite the traffic demand within the downtown area. So we have facilities that are overbuilt, which are both a challenge for the neighborhoods to access downtown, but an opportunity to potentially look at how those interactions happen, look at specific intersections potentially for reconfiguration, identification of future lights or street extensions. There's quite a bit in that transportation lens that offers itself to support the redevelopment opportunities when looked at as an opportunity to perhaps diversify what we have for transportation. Coupled with transportation is parking. Of course, with any retail component, parking is a critical component, but you can see in these maps that there is quite a bit of parking. Some of it's heavily utilized. Of course, the lot right outside of us tonight is one of the most heavily used because of the college and the proximity to downtown. But then when you jump across Centerpoint Drive, we've got large lots that are utilized around 25% of the time. So there is a bulk of surface parking that is not being used. There's parking that's in demand. And one of the things we have to look at very closely is how do we balance all of that as we move forward, because we recognize that people will walk, bike, and drive, and they will continue to do that to get to downtown. And we want to make sure that they're comfortable and they have the ability to do that into the future, but at the same time that we're not sacrificing any opportunities by shunting the transportation in any particular direction. The next piece being ownership. You see a large amount of public ownership within the downtown, both from the county complex and the discussions that happen around the city and county building, but then also the former Weber Tackle property and the surrounding environment that is currently owned by the county and is under conversation. You also see large amounts of the lands that have been purchased by the redevelopment authority are either dedicated as parks, but that public ownership component is another important component of looking at how the downtown may function into the future, because it's both an opportunity and a challenge as to how those individual sites will develop. From an existing land use, you see the checkerboard of public lands, retail lands, and residential, and that's something that will change as this becomes more diverse potentially for housing or incorporates other opportunities. Of course, with Shopko announcing their closure, it's a large block that needs to be looked at as a community as to what that future holds, so that applicants could either come forward that would then have some guidance, or the city could help facilitate the development in the pattern that they want. There's been lots of plans in process. There's been some discussion, of course, now of the Lullaby site, the Stoic Plumbing site, some of the other residential projects, the Belkey site, for example, that are being proposed and talked about. But then there's also been long-term plans about expansion of parks, connection of the riverfront to the downtown. These are all things that are opportunities, and really that's kind of the summary component to think about with three key questions. How does downtown redevelopment and reinvestment support the neighborhoods around it? How does reinvestment in downtown support downtown itself? And then how does the region benefit from connections and linkages, perhaps from the river to downtown, or through revitalization and reinvestment in the transportation network? The same is true for the Division Street corridor. Of course, there's fewer plans in the Division Street corridor because it's functioned as a transportation corridor predominantly, but you can see, of course, the roundabout on the north end has drastically changed with Century's new building coming online, the north end of this district, and restructured how that entire gateway functions. But there are other areas, such as the fact that UW Stevens Point is kind of one block off of Division Street and doesn't have that presence or gateway component off what is arguably one of the main entrance points to their campus. From a parking study, of course, parking around here is entirely driven by campus needs. So there's been a bunch of studies about the high utilization of the parking on campus. But the discussion of parking needs to round out to the residents' needs and impacts for residents as well, because on-street parking, off-street parking, all factors into the livability and enjoyability of the neighborhoods around it. And functional parking supply is going to be an important component to integrating the future uses. Same thing with public ownership. You see, of course, this is a corridor that's flanked by a lot of institutional uses. We've got the campus to the east. We have the school campuses to the west, as well as all of the different institutional components that happen in that neighborhood. So you've got a lot of different ownership blocks that are adjoining the Division Street. And so how can the redevelopment of this site support all those different users and knit the two neighborhoods back together? Existing land use, of course, as you'd expect, predominantly commercial, but then a lot of institutional uses abut it. And then there are also discussions and approvals for projects in this area. So we have the former Kmart site, we have the Century Insurance Building, we have some of the restaurants that have been proposed and approved. So there are plans in motion, albeit not as large a number as downtown. The big questions for this corridor to think about really are one point similar, and that is, how could reinvestment in this corridor knit the two neighborhoods back together? What role does this corridor serve within the greater context of the city, especially since you see the movement of retail from what used to want to be in the Division Street corridor moved out to the interchanges, perhaps further south in Plover, looking for more land, looking for bigger formats. That's not coming back. So as we look forward towards uses on Division Street, what uses would be appropriate there? How does that function in the context of the downtown area? And then what character does it take? Of course, as you come off the interstate, you get to the gateway of Century, and then it almost seems like you re-enter a highway until you get to Maria. Then you step down to the 1950s corridor with a very different character, and it's not till you get to 4th Street that you kind of feel like now you're in the heart and the fabric of the city. So there's very different constraints on the properties adjoining and different opportunities for all of those properties depending on the treatment and the ideas of how you could move forward. One of the final components to kind of bring to the table is the discussion of brownfields. Of course, all of these areas have been developed and utilized for different uses over many different years, and that's left a history, some good, some bad, that we do have to reflect in this. So I'll turn it over to Linnell to talk a little bit about the brownfields.
Sure. Thanks a lot. I'm Linnell Kane with Stantec, and we've been working with the city for the last 6 months on their brownfield redevelopment. We're an engineer and architect firm, and I'm headquartered out of our Green Bay office. So a lot of you might not know exactly what a brownfield is, so I'll just kind of give you a brief overview. A brownfield with the EPA definition, well, actually, I'll skip ahead here. I'll just mention too, with the brownfield redevelopment that we're doing, the city received a $300,000 grant from the US EPA. So we've been hired under the grant process to proceed with doing the brownfield assessment. So jumping into what a brownfield is, the US EPA defines a brownfield as a real property where expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous pollutants or any type of contaminants. So you might think, when you think of a brownfield site, you might think of the old corner gas station that's been abandoned, still sitting there, or an old industrial building that might be boarded up windows. But right now, we're actually sitting at an old brownfield site itself. The mall was considered a brownfield property. There was an old dry cleaner at this site, and the city's undergone cleanup, and it's got a lot of different cleanups already completed for this site, with one ongoing. And our efforts, this is the Vanderwall put together a map kind of showing, I think we probably have it on some of these boards too, or we'll be on the presentations, but it shows some of the different brownfield sites that are actually within the downtown corridor. So just within this area, and we're basing this only on DNR records, so just the ones that DNR actually knows about, there was 28 known sites within the downtown area. The focus of our grant, too, I want to mention, was in it's exact same areas that they're actually doing the area-wide plan, so this ties in hand with the area-wide planning efforts. If we go on to the next slide, in the Division Street corridor, there's 13 known cases, and from the DOT study that was done, there's several more brownfields along that corridor, which I'm sure you guys are all aware of. I want to give a little quick introduction about the EPA assessment grant. There's a lot of different things that we can use the funds for, and one of the things that we're doing right now is the brownfield inventory. So you'll see, and I have in the next slide, there's some nomination forms and some information on your tables, and if you haven't received one, just let me know. You can either go to the city website, and you can click on there, and you can nominate a site, and you can identify different brownfield sites that you might be aware of, or you've driven by, over the years, or one that's in your neighborhood. So we're looking for input, and we're gathering, putting together that inventory right now of all the different brownfield sites within these different corridors. And specifically, we're really focusing on the downtown, but also on Division. The second task that we're doing, and we've already started doing this work, is actually assessing, getting access and doing phase 1 environmental assessments at these sites. We've already done that for the Belkey properties and the Soik properties and moving those forward. The phase 1 is just kind of giving you historical records. Is there potential for contamination on the property? After that, you proceed and you can do a phase 2 environmental assessment, which actually means going out there and doing actual sampling. So we have actually proceeded and done that on a couple sites already for the city. And the last phase, which we're actually doing part right now, is just kind of getting the community outreach and involvement and making them aware that there's brownfield properties within the city. And I mentioned here's just a quick look at the city website. There's a link that they already put up there about brownfields. So if you're looking for a little bit more information on that, you can look at that, or grab me tonight and we can sit and talk about it a little bit more. I just don't want to spend a lot of time tonight on this effort. And there's also a copy of the site nomination form that was included on there. And then I just want to touch really quickly on why brownfields are important and why it's a problem in your community. One of the main things to think about is, obviously, it's a public health threat. If there's contamination there, it not only affects, the public health, but it also impacts the environment. And the other big thing is the loss of tax base. I mean, that's a huge effect. A lot of these properties are impacted. We're really not collecting much for tax base. And lastly, why redevelopment is important. One thing I just want to note is, like I said, with the health and safety, that's very important. But some of the facts that they've done out there, if you actually go in and clean up a brownfield site, it actually results in the area within a mile or a little more than a mile around that brownfield property. There's a 5 to 15% increase that they've shown over the years in the value of that property. So that's something really, it impacts everyone when the brownfield site's redeveloped. And then I'll turn it back over to Brian.
So, as we said, I apologize to a little bit longer, but we had a lot of information to get through. But the goal of tonight is not to have us stand here and talk. The goal is to gather information from all of you. So what we would like everyone to do is, first off, if you're at one of the tables that has the maps and the clickers, please pass those out. There should be enough for everybody in the room to get a clicker. If you're standing at the back of the room and can come to one of the tables to get a clicker, or raise your hand, we'll try to get some more out to you. We're going to be asking some basic polling questions about who's here, how they approach the different areas, and we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to participate.
Who needs one?
Everybody have one?
All right. Good. 99. Do we have one left? Do we have one left? I'm only grabbing this clicker real quick. All right. This should be fun. I'm Scott. I want to thank you again for coming. What we're going to do here is what we call keypad polling. And I know we're in a university town, so for all you professor types, this is not a survey. This is not a scientific effort. It's not intended to be. So don't come up after here and tell me how my questions are biased, okay? We tried not to do that, but it's a poll. We're trying to get a pulse of kind of where you all are at this point in terms of your interactions with these two study areas. And then we're going to break into these small groups and kind of talk more about some ideas for them.
So this is just one data point. The results that come out of this are not, definitive that whatever comes out of here, that's what has to be done. It's one of many of these data points that we're bringing in to help determine what these plans for these areas might be. So just wanted to kind of clarify that up front. So the first thing we want to do is to turn it on. It's really complicated. You push this blue button at the top. If a LED shows up in your screen, you're on. So we're going to ask questions. They're each going to have 5 possible answers that correspond with the 5 keys on your clicker. All you do is click the one that you want. If you click one and said, no, I didn't want 3, I wanted 5, then just click 5. Whatever button you push last is the one that's going to register. We're going to have a little countdown, so we'll know when time is up to get your votes in on time. And the beautiful thing about this is we're going to see the results instantly. Well, oh, there we go. All right, 100. All right. So, yes, sir.
Before we get started, is there anybody who doesn't have theirs on? Anybody having problems? No? Nathan, we figured you would be the problem. Anybody else?
Anybody still not have one?
Okay. Yeah, last call for anybody who doesn't have it. Yeah, there we go.
2 more.
3 more. 3.
3. No, all right.
The whole table. So raise your hands if you don't have one and want one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
No, there's
8.
a bunch more over in that corner.
We'll get them.
All right, thank you. Yep, all right. All right. Can you hand those out?
Serena, you got one?
Excellent. All right. Everybody good?
Last call. And they're on.
Again, push the blue button. If you get little bars in your LED screen, you're good to go. So, we're going to start out with a few questions of what we call kind of who's in the room. Who do we have here tonight? Looking at kind of where you live and some other demographics. So let's get under the way here. How long have you been living in the Stevens Point area? Been here my whole life, less than a year, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 11 plus. Push the button that corresponds with your particular case. This number down here is the number of people who are voting. The number on the far right is the time that's left, which is time's up. And there we go. So 55% of you, 11 plus years, 22% been here your whole life. So obviously a great deal of community knowledge here tonight, which is wonderful. And thank you for the new folks showing up as well. All right, question number 2. Why did you come here? My parents, school, significant other, job or employment, or I retired here. So what brought you here originally? If you were born here, that was obviously your parents brought you here. So 4 seconds. Our survey says. So 28%, the parents kind of corresponds with those who were born here, and job and employment.
I want to stop one more time. Is there anybody who can't read a screen? Because we had 100, we have 108 out, so we should have 108 votes. So I'm not seeing that. I just want to make sure everybody can see the screens. Everybody's functioning okay? All right.
All right.
99 in service.
Okay. Let's go up again. Where do you live? So downtown within our defined boundary shown in red, or Division Street corridor shown there in B, elsewhere in the city, elsewhere in the county, or elsewhere. So 4 seconds. 96. All right, what do we got? So let's see, 33% in the city, but not in our study area, 21% in downtown, 13% in Division Street, and 29% elsewhere in the county. So good geographic distribution. Where do you work? So same options here in the downtown, in Division Street, elsewhere in the city, elsewhere in the county, other. So then other. And we know several of you are here tonight because you work in the area, and others of you live, some do both. And 2 seconds left. Yeah. So we got 33% other, and then pretty decent distribution here, 22% for downtown and elsewhere, and 12% in Division Street and elsewhere in the county. So a lot of familiarity with the area. Okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about assets, issues, and opportunities. We're first going to go through this for the downtown, and then we're going to have an identical set of questions for Division Street. So the first one is, how often do you visit the area? So this is downtown. How often do you go downtown? Daily, a couple times a week, a couple times a month, less than once a month, almost never.
But you're here tonight, so
Yes.
that counts.
Start your time. Yeah, so it's at least once, right? All right, so what's that? 77% are here daily or a couple of times a week. So a lot of familiarity and continual usage of the downtown amongst those who are here. Only 4%, almost never. Next one, when I visit the area, I most frequently get there by. So what, do you walk, do you drive, do you take the bus? You take your power scooter, your rollerblades. %, driving on my own. Second, 16% with walking. So, I go downtown mostly for. So what's the chief reason that brings you here? Work, food and drink, personal services, shopping, recreation. What's the number one reason that brings you into our downtown? So 42% food and drink, 20% work, and then kind of followed distantly by personal services, shopping, and recreation. Okay, let's look conversely. I rarely go downtown for. So what don't you do here that you go somewhere else? Food and drink, personal services, shopping for basics like groceries and paper goods, personal care, shopping for non-basics, basically everything else, furniture, clothing, whatever, or recreation. So what do you do typically elsewhere than the downtown? What's that? Okay, 43% shopping for basics, 35% personal services, salon, banking. And the 1% food and drink, which balances out with the high percentage on the last one, so that makes sense. All right, now, this question is, okay, why don't you do that downtown? So for whatever you answered, why don't you do it downtown? Is it because there's better selection elsewhere? There's a better selection elsewhere outside of Stevens Point. It's too expensive. Parking's a hassle. Location's not convenient. So better selection elsewhere, followed by in town and followed by out of town. So whatever it was that you weren't doing, it's because there's better options somewhere else. And what we're able to do with the data here is to correlate how you answered your first question with your second question. So we'll know, for those that are personal goods or whatever, where else you're going. Okay, I think that's One more for downtown? Okay. Downtown area would benefit most from more food and drink, personal service businesses, again, that's hair salons, nail salons, barbershops, that type of thing, retail, recreation, or entertainment. So what would you like to see more of in the downtown? %, on retail and 38% on entertainment. So it was pretty overwhelming over the other items. So excellent. Well, and it's this kind of question that you get into more when you talk in your groups. So with that, we're going to shift to Division Street. Pretty much the same set of questions here, starting off with how often do you go to Division Street? Yeah, go ahead. So very high level of use there as well, daily, a couple of times a week at 71%, a couple of times a month by another 18. So I know in this community it's kind of a hard corridor to avoid even if you wanted to. So how do you get there? Driving, walking, rollerblading, ice skating. %, driving, so even more so than the downtown, followed by a distant biking, moped, power scooter. So, all right. So, why do you go there? What's the thing that most frequently brings you to the Division Street area? All right, 41% food and drink, and then really kind of a cluster of almost everything else except recreation. So kind of a mix with food and drink leading that area too. Why don't you go there? You rarely go there for this. %, recreation, and then kind of a cluster of everything else with food and drink being the least. And the same question of why don't you do that there? Better selection elsewhere in the city, followed by better selection elsewhere in the county. Okay, and then to wrap this up, the corridor would benefit most from more of which of these? More retail here as well, and then everything else is kind of a distant and kind of tied for that. So pretty similar result. Okay, that concludes the clicker portion of the program. You can toss those back in the basket
Gently.
And let's go to the next slide. Yeah, you don't even have to turn them off. They'll turn themselves off, so don't even worry about that. Just toss them in the basket. They are useless outside of this room. They may even have a dye pack in them if you. So please return them. All right, so this is a tremendous turnout. Frankly, bigger than what we had anticipated. So thank you. As Brian said, we've had planning efforts for entire cities that draw a third of this much. So your interest in this area is fabulous. We're going to get to know our neighbor really well because we only have 8 tables where we have the maps, and we need everybody, 10 tables starting here all the way that way, and we need everybody to be at a table with a map. So folks at these tables here, if you take your chairs with you, that would be helpful. There are chairs here and there. There's additional chairs back there. Are there more chairs out in the hall, or are they all in? Chairs at this front table. If you don't have a chair, raise your hand. We'll get you a chair. But if everybody could kind of migrate to a table, we'll start with that.
Participate in this, please.
Also, at each table, there should be yellow pads of sheets for you to be able to take notes or give comments. If you don't have one, we will happily come around and get you one. We also have pencils, which I'll try not to drop. So if you need something to write with, please let us know as well.
Scott, if you want to let them know, there's food and drink too. Just
Oh, right. Yep. Will do. Thank you. So you got room kind of here, just to my right. Room at these tables.
Some room in the back corner.
That's not going
More
anywhere.
chairs?
We need more chairs. Raise your hand. We'll bring one over to you.
You have a chair? We're almost all friends here.
Couple of chairs in this back corner too that you can grab. A couple right over here on this table that aren't being used.
Probably going to be short yellow.
No, okay.
So I think Nicole made 80.
No, all right.
And we're at like 95.
Okay. I wonder if there's a copy center here. What do they need?
Pencils and worksheets.
Okay. Right, okay. Okay, as you're getting settled in, one housekeeping note, there is some food and beverage back over here, so at any time feel free to help yourself to that. There's kind of 2 parts to this. The first part is on one side of the handout where there's a couple of questions about each area. And what we want you to do is take a couple of minutes to fill that out on your own. Following that, then we want to have some interaction within your table. So if you turn over your sheet, the instructions are there. But basically what we'd like you to do is kind of go around the table and address kind of 4 things. Starting out with things that you really like about the downtown, specific places, specific characteristics of it that you find really attractive, that are the kind of thing that you would want to show somebody from out of town, that you think really create a nice environment, really set the theme for downtown. You would do that by placing a green dot on that particular spot, or if it's not place specific, there's a news pad on every table. And if you would write that down using the black marker, those would be the positive things. And beyond putting down the dot, if you jot down a couple of words about what it is and why, if it's a really long explanation, then put a number on the dot and then go over to the newsprint and write it there. After that, we're going to kind of do the opposite. We're going to use the red marker and the red dots to indicate the areas that are maybe not as attractive, or, you know, darn it, can't somebody do something about this? Or if you could wave a wand and make a change, including things that maybe aren't there that should be there. So it may be something that gets written down again on the newsprint, that we need more of this or less of that, whatever it may be. And then we're going to repeat the process for Division Street. We want everybody to have a chance to participate, so we'd ask that you kind of go around the table with everybody, you know, placing their green dot quickly and kind of explaining why it is that what it is they're putting down, and moving on to the next person. There'll be about 15 minutes for each of those 4 things. We'll call time so you'll know when to switch to the next thing. So just keep going around the table until we tell you time's up.
A couple quick housekeeping items before we thank everyone again. If you have any notes that are tied to your maps, make sure that you've got the table numbers from the sheets on the maps and on any of your notes. That way we can correlate what number 1 on table 9 is to table 9 versus table 6. It helps us out when we tabulate some of the information. Again, if you have any notes that you want to scribble on the maps, that's fine. We'll have a few minutes to do that after we come to a close. But I wanted to take just a brief minute here to thank everybody. We've been doing these kind of workshops for many years, and it's always good to see a turnout, especially a bigger turnout than anticipated. So thank you. It speaks to the importance of these areas within the community, and we certainly welcome and appreciate all the input that you've given us tonight. Again, we will be summarizing this information. We'll try to take pictures of the maps. We will get information from the sheets pulled together, get that to the city so you can kind of see not just what the report says in the future, but what some of the comments were. So we want to make sure that's available to everybody, and we will work to get that up. If there are folks who couldn't join us tonight, of course, thankfully, we've been recording the presentation. We will have the comment sheets up on the website. So if people would like to give comments after the fact, they'll have an opportunity to do that, and we'll welcome input throughout this process. Again, as I mentioned, this is step 1 of a planning process that is even step 1 of the implementation. So we will be back. We'll be summarizing a lot of this information, integrating, trying to work together to get some vision around how we recommend proceeding, and then we'll get that out to you. So please watch the agendas. We will make sure that's available for everyone to see, and we'll look forward to hopefully an even bigger turnout when we have some recommendations to share. So again, I want to thank you for your efforts tonight, for the great turnout, and for all of your input. It will help build momentum for the city to begin looking at how to make these ideas happen. And it really takes that kind of citizen support and broad discussion as a community to make a decision that will last not just tomorrow, but forecast out over the course of several years. So thank you again, and thank you for all of your input. Mayor, is there anything you'd like to add in?
Just one quick comment, because I think it needs to be said. You didn't see a lot of the alders here, the alder persons, and that's because of legal issues that we have with open meetings. We have to have certain agendas and follow certain guidelines. They all wanted to be here, but legally we couldn't have them here without following a bunch of red tape and doing a bunch of certain things. So that's why they're not here. It's not because they didn't want to be, they did. And as I said, we're recording it, so you'll have opportunities to view it. And people who couldn't make it can participate, and we'll be taking comments. This is the beginning of a process that will take several months. And we appreciate everything you do and coming in here to be part of our community and making it even better than it already is. Thank you.
Thank you. So, one other piece. As you go out, there's a box for your yellow sheets. Any notes you want to give us beyond what's at the table, you can put that in that box. Certainly on your way out, we appreciate that. If you could leave the maps and any other notes at the tables, we will collect all of those and put them into the record. So thank you again, and have a good night.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.